Honourable Member Materia Ture. Tēnā koe, Ms Ture.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. First, before I begin this contribution on the bill, I do just want to acknowledge the passing of Dennis Hansen, who has been named as the man who was killed in a car crash yesterday. Koro Hansen is a kaumatua of significant standing, not just in Auckland and with Ngāpuhi, but around the country. And so we want to just acknowledge his loss and the loss to his whānau and to his hapu and to his iwi. Kia ora. Mr Speaker, now to the bill. This bill is not about housing affordability. That is not what this bill addresses. It is actually about urban sprawl. It's about undermining the Resource Management Act and about usurping the role of local government in making decisions about housing provision in their local area. Now, I'll talk in this contribution about housing affordability, but I do, and my colleague Eugenie Sage will discuss the RMA and local government aspects of it, because this is a very serious attack on the right of local councils to make decisions for themselves. Now, there's no doubt that we do need legislation to improve the affordability of housing. There is a nationwide housing crisis. My colleague Holly Walker, who is responsible for this bill on behalf of the Greens, has talked in previous contributions on this bill. The average house price in Auckland is over $700,000. There is a crisis in Christchurch as a result of the lack of housing from the earthquake. The average price of housing across Aotearoa as a whole is well over $400,000. It is simply unaffordable for most New Zealanders to purchase their own home. So absolutely, housing affordability must be a priority for this government. But this bill clearly shows that housing affordability is not, because this bill does not deal with it in any way. This bill identifies housing affordability as a problem, but it deals, in fact, with land supply. And land supply has been a major political issue for this government, but is not actually the major issue when it comes to providing more affordable housing for anyone, even in Auckland. Now, it's certainly true that there may be some issues in Auckland, but there's also issues with land barons, for example, people holding on to land that could be used for housing now, but are waiting for it to improve in its value. So there is an element of, I think, greed in the way that housing has been treated and the way that government supports housing being treated by the private market. The Property Council has said that land supply is at most half of the problem around housing affordability, and that land supply certainly is an issue that does not affect the rest of the country outside of Auckland to any great extent. So to the extent that this bill deals with land supply, it's only dealing with a small proportion of the problem in some specific areas, not about housing affordability across the country. There is no requirement in this bill for the houses that are to be built to be affordable. There's no legislative provision that makes affordable housing core to this legislation. The government has acknowledged that that's the case. And in fact, the only reason that housing affordability is even in the parts of the bill as it is because Auckland Council has required that to be the case as part of the accord. That's great from their point of view, but if the government doesn't make it a priority for them, it simply won't be a priority for others elsewhere. The Minister has also confessed in Select Committee that this bill will not increase the numbers of affordable houses for New Zealanders to buy. The Minister has agreed that the bill will not result in the provision of more affordable housing. So it really is a farce from the beginning. All the evidence shows that the issue of housing in New Zealand is that there are too few affordable homes being built. Because there is, and for the private market, for the private industry, they can't really be expected to fill this gap. There is too low a return for them building these homes. So who ought to fill the gap? Well, of course, the state has to be part of this. The state needs to treat housing as core infrastructure. It is no less important to our economic and social well-being as roads are, as power provision, as water, as electricity, as Internet, broadband, that gets treated as infrastructure, whereas housing does not. And unless the state takes on housing as core infrastructure, we will continue to see this problem, because we can't expect the private sector to take up the space. And government isn't being asked to do it on their own. They're being asked to do it in partnership with a whole range of organisations who are prepared to help and take on a huge part of the burden. Community organisations, housing organisations, iwi organisations, for example, councils are all prepared to engage in a partnership with government to improve the numbers of affordable homes being built. But this government is not interested in those partnerships. They want to leave it to the private market and keep their hands off. The fact is, too, that the suburbs of this country, the towns of New Zealand, were not built by private industry. They were built by the state. And they were built by the state because the state believed that in order to protect our economic base, in order to provide stability for families and for workers, and to ensure that children have the best chance of a good life and a fair future, a stable, warm, dry, affordable home was essential. And that is why it has been in the past, some decades ago now, treated as core infrastructure, but in more recent times abandoned. And therefore that neglect has left thousands of New Zealand families, especially the very young, who are just starting out on their journey of having children and building their life together, from being able to access homes. Let's just have a look at some of the statistics. 500,000 New Zealanders now rent. Now, there will always be those who want to rent, but 500,000 New Zealanders, many of whom are trapped into the rental market because there simply aren't enough affordable homes. We are seeing a decline in home ownership, particularly of the middle deciles. So though it's middle-income New Zealanders, actually, where we've seen the greatest decline in home ownership over the last probably 5 years. So we're seeing this is not about necessarily state housing for the very poor, although that has to be part of the solution. This is about housing for the middle classes, and actually the middle classes are the ones who are suffering from the greatest decline in home ownership. And we just need to look at the statistics around the new dwellings. So in 2003, there were 10 times more homes being built that cost less than $250,000 than those that cost more than $250,000. 10 times more affordable homes being built in 2003. And after a sharp and steady decline, we're now in a situation where there is only half as many. So only half as many affordable homes being built as unaffordable ones. So there needs to be a significant shift in the way that government is treating housing. And if it's not, because nobody else can do it. Nobody else has the infrastructure, the funding, the low cost of borrowing to be able to do this. So the Greens have proposed a number of solutions to deal with the housing crisis. Yes, we must engage in a state house building program in partnership with a whole range of other organisations and treat it as an investment, not as a burden. These are assets on the government's books. We must have products like the progressive ownership system, for example, that we have proposed in our Home for Life proposals, which do not require a family to have a mortgage, do not require a deposit, but are means by which families can enter into and own affordable homes, paying them off over a long period of time to create stability for them as workers, to create stability for them as families and for their children. We need a comprehensive capital gains tax on all but the family home to help take the heat out of the market. A warrant of fitness for rental properties, again to help take the heat out of the rental market, and more secure tenure for renters, so that if those who will be locked out of home ownership for long periods of time can still have the benefit of secure, affordable, warm, dry homes. These are not radical solutions that are untested. These are all sensible policies that will address the housing crisis and treat housing like the core infrastructure that it is. Unfortunately, this bill does nothing. We are opposing this bill. Thank you.
The Honourable John Banks.
Mr. Speaker, I was listening carefully to the co-leader